The distress beacon had been pulsing for 6 standard cycles, and Chief Researcher Saleth was beginning to lose hope. The Corvani scientist pressed their thin, translucent fingers against the cold glass of the observation window and stared out into the hellscape that surrounded them. The Ashfall Nebula stretched in every direction like a wound in space itself, swirling with radiation clouds and gravitational anomalies that made navigation nearly impossible. Behind Saleth, the other 42 survivors huddled in the central chamber of the research vessel Velanthus, their bioluminescent skin flickering with fear and exhaustion. The soft blue glow that normally indicated health and calm had faded to a sickly gray, and several of the younger researchers had stopped glowing entirely. "Any responses?" asked Navigator Corinth. Their voice barely above a whisper. Saleth turned away from the window and shook their elongated head slowly. The movement sent pain shooting through their radiation-damaged tissue, but they forced themselves to remain composed for the sake of the others. "The Valtteri hegemony has officially declined," Saleth said, pulling up the communication logs on a flickering holographic display. "They say the radiation levels exceed safe tolerances for their crews." A soft moan of despair rippled through the gathered survivors. "What about the Illusari?" someone called out. "They have shielded vessels." "The Illusari Collective has also refused," Saleth replied, and each word felt like a blade in their throat. "They cite the gravitational instabilities as presenting unacceptable risk to their navigation systems." The moaning grew louder, and Saleth could see panic beginning to spread through the group like a disease. They had to maintain order, had to keep everyone calm, even though their own hearts were filled with the same creeping terror. "Surely someone will come," said young Veleth, barely more than a child, their small form trembling against their parent's side. "Someone has to help us." Saleth did not answer immediately because they did not want to lie to a child. The truth was brutal and simple. No one was coming. In the 6 cycles since the Velanthus had suffered catastrophic engine failure and become trapped in the Ashfall Nebula, Saleth had sent distress calls to 17 different species across the galactic community. Every single one had found a reason to refuse. The Mendari Republic had sent the most painful response of all. Their message had arrived just hours ago, composed in the flowery diplomatic language their species favored. "We mourn your inevitable loss and pray that your essence returns peacefully to the cosmic stream. May your memories live on in the hearts of those who knew you." They were not offering rescue. They were offering a funeral. Saleth moved to the life support console and checked the readings for the 100th time that day. The numbers had not improved. Oxygen reserves would last perhaps another 4 cycles if they rationed carefully. The hull integrity was holding for now, but the radiation from the nearby stellar fragment was slowly cooking them alive. Their bodies, evolved on the gentle paradise world of Corvin Prime, were never meant to withstand such punishment. "We should prepare final messages for our families," Corinth said quietly, appearing at Saleth's side. "If any probe ever recovers our data cores, at least our loved ones will know what happened." "We are not dead yet," Saleth replied. "Though the words felt hollow, we might as well be," Corinth said. "Every species in range has abandoned us. The mathematics are clear. Number civilization will risk their ships and crews for 43 researchers trapped in a death zone." Saleth wanted to argue, wanted to find some thread of hope to cling to, but Corinth was right. The galactic community operated on logic and probability. They calculated acceptable losses and made rational decisions. 43 lives simply did not outweigh the risk of losing a rescue vessel and its crew. The communication console suddenly beeped, and both Corvani researchers turned to stare at it in shock. "Another response?" Corinth breathed. Saleth hurried to the console and pulled up the incoming transmission with trembling fingers. The signal was faint, originating from somewhere beyond the edge of civilized space. but it was definitely directed at them. The identification codes were unfamiliar, belonging to a species so new to the galactic stage that Sylith had to search the database to even recognize them Terran. The species was called Terran, or sometimes human. They came from a world designated Earth, a planet that the Galactic Council had classified as a Category 12 death world. Sylith felt ice spread through their veins. They had heard stories about the Deathworlders, terrifying tales shared in hushed voices at scientific conferences and diplomatic gatherings. The humans came from a world of extreme gravity, violent weather, toxic atmosphere, and predatory megafauna. They were said to be nearly indestructible, capable of surviving injuries that would kill any civilized being 10 times over. They were also said to be dangerous beyond measure. The message crackled through the speakers, and a voice unlike any Sylith had ever heard filled the chamber. It was deep and resonant, carrying undertones of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Terran vessel Adamantin responding to Corvani distress signal. We have received your coordinates and are plotting an intercept course. Hold your position and conserve your resources. We are coming to get you. Silence fell over the survivors. Did they say they are coming? Young Velith asked, their small voice filled with confused hope. They cannot be serious, Corinth said, shaking their head in disbelief. The Ashfall Nebula has killed dozens of ships. The radiation alone would destroy any vessel that enters. Perhaps their ships are specially shielded, Sylith offered. Though they did not believe their own words, or perhaps they are simply insane, Corinth replied. That would fit with everything we have heard about the Deathworlders. Sylith turned back to the communication console and opened a response channel. Their fingers hesitated over the controls as they considered what to say. Should they warn the Terrans away? Should they explain that rescue was impossible and that they would only be throwing away their own lives? Before Sylith could transmit anything, another message arrived. Be advised. Terran vessel. Adamantin is a search and rescue frigate with full radiation hardening and emergency medical facilities. Our estimated arrival time is 18 standard cycles. Your people are going to be okay. The casual confidence in that final statement struck Sylith like a physical blow. The human had not said they would try to help, or that they hoped to save them. They had stated it as simple fact, as though the rescue was already complete, and the survivors simply needed to wait for reality to catch up. They are either the bravest beings in the galaxy, Sylith said slowly, or the most foolish. Does it matter? Corinth asked, and for the first time in 6 cycles, there was something other than despair in their voice. They are coming. No one else would, but they are coming. Sylith looked around at the other survivors, at the flickering bioluminescence that had suddenly grown just a little bit brighter, and felt something strange stirring in their chest. It took them a moment to recognize the sensation because they had not felt it in so long. It was hope. The Deathworlders were coming. And somehow, against all logic and reason, the 43 doomed souls aboard the Volantis were going to survive. Captain Elena Vasquez stood at the bridge of the Terran rescue frigate, Adamantin, and studied the holographic map floating before her with sharp, calculating eyes. The Ashfall Nebula glowed an angry red on the display, its swirling clouds of radiation and debris marking it as one of the most dangerous regions in the known galaxy. Deep within that hellscape, a small blue dot blinked steadily, representing the stranded Cavani vessel and its 43 terrified passengers. Navigation has confirmed the intercept course, reported Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka from the pilot station, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. We can reach them in 18 cycles if we push the engines to maximum. Then push them. Vasquez replied without hesitation. The bridge crew moved into action with the smooth efficiency that came from years of training and countless rescue operations. The Adamantin was not a warship or an exploration vessel. It was built for one purpose only, and that purpose was to go where no one else would go and bring people home. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Kwame Asay entered the bridge with a data tablet in his large hands. His dark face creased with concern. The doctor was a massive man by any standard, standing nearly 2 meters tall, with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway. But his gentle eyes and soft voice revealed the healer within. "I have been researching the Corvani," he said, handing the tablet to Vasquez. "They are Class 7 beings, Captain. Hollow bones, extremely sensitive respiratory systems, and skin that cannot tolerate anything above 0.3 standard gravity. Fragile," Vasquez summarized. "Incredibly fragile," Asay confirmed. The radiation levels in the Ashfall Nebula would have begun affecting them within hours of exposure. By now, they will be suffering from severe cellular degradation, respiratory distress, and possibly neurological damage. We need to be prepared for mass casualties. How many can we realistically save?" asked First Officer James McAllister, leaning against the tactical console with his muscular arms crossed over his chest. Mac, as the crew called him, was a veteran of a dozen impossible rescues, and his scarred face told the story of everyone. "If we reach them within the 18-cycle window, I believe we can save most of them," Asay replied. "But we will need to work fast. Every hour matters. Then we work fast," Vasquez said simply. She turned to address the rest of the bridge crew, her voice carrying the calm authority that had earned her command of the Adamantin. Every face that looked back at her was hardened by experience, shaped by a lifetime on a world that had tried to kill them from the moment they were born. "You have all seen the situation," she began. 43 Corvani researchers are trapped in one of the most hostile environments in the galaxy. Their ship is failing, their bodies are failing, and they have nowhere to go. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over her crew. 17 species received their distress call. 17 species refused to help. The Valkyrie said the radiation was too dangerous. The Illusari said the navigation was too risky. The Mendari sent their condolences and started writing obituaries. A low murmur of disgust rippled through the bridge crew. Those species looked at the numbers and decided that 43 lives were not worth the risk. Vasquez continued. They made the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that any reasonable civilization would make. She smiled then, a fierce expression that showed her teeth. But we are not reasonable. We are human, and someone has to do it. The crew responded with grim nods and determined expressions. There was no cheering, no dramatic speeches in return. They simply understood what needed to be done and accepted it. Without question, Engineer Sophia Chun spoke up from her station near the back of the bridge. She was a small woman with quick hands and an even quicker mind, responsible for keeping the Adamantin running in conditions that would destroy lesser vessels. "Captain, I have calculated our exposure window," she said. "Once we enter the nebula, we will have approximately 12 hours before the radiation levels become lethal even for us. That gives us enough time to reach the Volanthus, extract the survivors, and escape before the stellar fragment collapses. And if something goes wrong?" Mac asked with a raised eyebrow. "Then we improvise," Chum replied with a shrug. "That is what we always do." The Adamantin shuddered slightly as its engines powered up to maximum thrust, and the stars outside the viewport began to stretch into long lines of light. They were accelerating toward the nebula at speeds that would terrify most galactic species, pushing their ship and their bodies to limits that only Deathworlders could endure, as if on cue. An incoming transmission alert flashed across the communications console. "We are being hailed," reported Communications Officer David Park. "It is coming from a Valkyrie observation post near the nebula perimeter." "Put it through," Vasquez ordered. The holographic display flickered, and a Velthory face appeared. The alien's features were smooth and angular, with large, multifaceted eyes that reflected fear and confusion. Their kind had evolved on a world of gentle breezes and endless meadows, and they had never understood the Terrans who came from a planet of storms and fire. Terran vessel. "This is Velthory Observation Post 7, the alien said in a voice that trembled slightly. "We have detected your trajectory and must warn you that you are heading directly into the Ashfall Nebula. This region is classified as a Category 5 hazard zone. Entry is not recommended under any circumstances. We are aware of the classification," Vasquez replied calmly. "Then surely you understand the proceeding is suicidal," the Velthory continued. "The radiation alone will destroy your ship within hours. We urge you to turn back before it is too late." Vasquez exchanged a glance with Mac, who simply grinned. "Thank you for your concern," she said, turning back to the display. "We will proceed anyway." The Velthory's multifaceted eyes widened in what could only be described as horror. "You cannot be serious," they said. "No species would willingly enter the Ashfall Nebula. The risk is simply too great. The mathematics clearly show that rescue is impossible." "Your mathematics might show that," Vasquez agreed. "Our mathematics show 43 people who need our help. That calculation is simple enough for us." She reached out and terminated the transmission before the Velthory could respond. The observation post faded from their sensors as the adamantine plunged deeper into the void, leaving the safety of civilized space behind. Ahead of them, the Ashfall Nebula grew larger and more menacing with every passing moment. Its swirling clouds of death beckoning them forward, D'Orsay moved to stand beside Vasquez, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Do you think we can really save them all, Captain?" Vasquez looked at the map, at the tiny blue dot representing 43 fragile lives waiting for salvation, and then at her crew. These impossible humans who had followed her into hell more times than she could count. "I do not know," she admitted quietly. "But I know we have to try. That is what separates us from everyone else. They calculate risk. We calculate lives. And every life is worth fighting for." The adamantine crossed the threshold into the Ashfall Nebula, and the stars disappeared behind a wall of radiation and fire. The Deathworlders had arrived. The Ashfall Nebula was worse than anything the crew of the adamantine had ever experienced. And they had experienced horrors that would break most species' radiation alarms screamed constantly throughout the ship, their warning lights painting every corridor in shades of angry red. The hull groaned under gravitational stresses that shifted and twisted without warning, threatening to tear the vessel apart. Heat seeped through even the most heavily shielded sections, turning the interior into a sweltering nightmare. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka gripped the pilot controls with white-knuckled hands, her eyes fixed on the chaotic maze of debris and energy storms that filled the viewport. Flying through the nebula was like navigating a hurricane made of fire and broken glass, and every second required her complete concentration. "Hard left," shouted the navigation computer, and Tanaka yanked the controls without thinking. The adamantine banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a spinning chunk of stellar debris that would have punched through their hull like a bullet through paper. "That was close," muttered engineer Sophia Chun from her station, sweat dripping down her face as she fought to keep the ship's systems from overloading. "Another 6 meters, and we would have been space dust. Just another day at the office," Mac replied with a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. Captain Vasquez stood at the center of the bridge, her feet planted firmly on the deck despite the constant shaking and lurching. The radiation was already affecting her. She could feel it in the way her skin tingled and her head throbbed, but she pushed the discomfort aside with the ease of long practice. "How much further?" she asked. "We should reach the Volantis in approximately 20 minutes, Tanaka reported, her voice strained with concentration. If I can keep us from hitting anything, you will, Vasquez said with absolute confidence. The next 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. The nebula threw everything it had at them, from radiation spikes that nearly overwhelmed their shielding to gravitational waves that sent crew members stumbling into walls. Somewhere in the lower decks, a pipe burst from the pressure changes, and damage control teams rushed to contain the flooding. But the adamantine kept going because that was what Terran vessels did. They kept going when any sane species would have turned back. They pushed through impossible conditions because someone was waiting on the other side who needed their help finally. Through the swirling chaos, a shape appeared on their sensors. Contact. Park announced from the communications console. I have the Volantis on scope. Bearing 2-7-Mark-4, distance 800 meters. Vasquez leaned forward, and the view screen magnified to show their target. The Corvani research vessel was in terrible condition, its elegant curves now scarred and blackened by radiation burns. Atmosphere vented from multiple breaches in the hull, and the running lights flickered weakly like the fading pulse of a dying heart. Life signs? She asked. RSA checked his medical scanner, his brow furrowed with concern. I am reading 43 Corvani life signs, but many are extremely weak. They are running out of time, Captain. Then let us not waste any more of it, Vasquez replied. All hands, prepare for rescue operations. I want EVA teams suited up and ready to deploy in 5 minutes. The Adamant maneuvered alongside the crippled Corvani vessel with surprising delicacy, matching its damaged rotation and extending emergency docking clamps. The moment they achieved a solid connection, the airlock doors opened and human rescue teams poured through in their heavy EVA suits aboard the Volantis. Chief Researcher Saleth watched the approaching figures with a mixture of hope and primal terror. The humans moved through the toxic atmosphere and intense radiation without hesitation, their bulky suits making them look like monsters from some ancient nightmare. They were so dense, so heavy, walking with a confidence that seemed almost aggressive. The lead figure reached Saleth and stopped, their helmet turning to survey the huddled mass of Corvani survivors. Through the visor, Saleth could see a dark face with kind eyes. A strange combination that made no sense. I am Dr. Quaim Asay, the human said through his suit speakers, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. We are here to help. Can you tell me how many are injured? All of us, Saleth managed to reply, their voice weak and raspy. The radiation has affected everyone. Asay nodded and immediately began issuing orders to his medical team. They moved among the Corvani with unexpected care. Their massive gloved hands somehow tender as they administered treatments and prepared the most critical patients for transport. Saleth watched in amazement as the humans worked. Despite their terrifying appearance, they moved with purpose and compassion. They spoke softly to frightened survivors, reassuring them with gentle words. One human knelt beside young Velith and produced a small toy from a pocket, a fuzzy earth creature called a teddy bear, and gave it to the trembling child. More humans arrived. Engineers this time, carrying equipment to stabilize the failing life support systems. They worked at incredible speed, seemingly unbothered by the radiation that was slowly killing them with every passing minute. How are they surviving this? Navigator Corinth asked weakly, watching a human technician while the hull breach closed without any apparent protection. They are Deathworlders, Saleth replied. They were born in hell. This is nothing to them. But even as they said the words, Saleth realized they were not entirely true. The humans were suffering. They could see it now in the way their movements had grown slightly sluggish, in the sweat that dripped down their faces inside their helmets, in the occasional grimace of pain quickly hidden. They were just as mortal as anyone else, just as vulnerable to the nebula's wrath. They were simply willing to endure it anyway. Captain Vasquez appeared in the main chamber, having left the bridge to oversee the evacuation personally. She moved through the crowd of survivors, checking on their condition, offering words of encouragement. When she reached Salith, she stopped and knelt beside the Corvani researcher. "You are the one who sent the distress call?" she asked. "I am Chief Researcher Salith," they confirmed. I did not think anyone would answer. Vasquez reached up and removed her helmet despite the toxic air, exposing her scarred face and sweat-soaked hair. The gesture was deliberately intimate, a way of showing that she saw them as equals rather than victims. "We always answer," she said simply. "That is what we do." Salith stared into the human's eyes, those predator eyes that should have inspired fear, and found only warmth and determination. This woman had flown into a death trap without hesitation, was poisoning herself with every breath, all to save people she had never met. Why? Salith asked, the question escaping before they could stop it. "Why risk your lives for us? Your species owes us nothing." Vasquez smiled, and the expression transformed her hard face into something almost beautiful. "Because you needed help, and we could give it. That is reason enough for us. That will always be reason enough." The evacuation continued as more Corvani were transferred to the safety of the Adamantine. With each trip, the human rescuers moved a little slower, their bodies absorbing more and more of the nebula's lethal radiation. But they did not stop, did not complain, did not hesitate. They had come to save 43 lives, and they would accept nothing less than success. The evacuation had been going well until the stellar fragment began to collapse. Ahead of schedule engineer Sophia Chun was the first to notice the change in the sensor readings, and her face went pale beneath the grime and sweat. The massive chunk of dying star that had been slowly destabilizing was now accelerating toward a catastrophic detonation. "Captain, we have a serious problem," she shouted into her communicator. Vasquez hurried to Chun's side and looked at the data. Her expression hardened as she understood the implications. They had lost nearly 4 hours of their safety window. Instead of 12 hours to complete the evacuation, they now had less than 2. How many survivors are still aboard the Volantis? She demanded 12, Dr. Assay reported, his voice tight with frustration. "They are trapped in a sealed compartment in the lower section. The hull buckled during a gravitational wave, and we cannot reach them through normal access points." "Then we cut through," Vasquez replied. "We have tried," Chun said, shaking her head. "The structural damage is catastrophic. The moment we breach that compartment, the entire section will collapse. Whoever goes in will be crushed." A heavy silence fell over the rescue team as the terrible math became clear. 12 lives were trapped behind a wall of twisted metal, and saving them would almost certainly cost the life of whoever tried. First Officer James McAllister stepped forward, his scarred face calm and resolved. He had been working at the front lines of the rescue all day, absorbing more radiation than anyone else on the team. His suit's medical monitors had been flashing warnings for hours, warnings he had deliberately ignored. "I will do it," he said. "Absolutely not," Vasquez replied immediately. "We will find another way. Elena, there is no other way, and we both know it," Max said, using her first name in a way that made the other crew members look away. "Someone has to go in there and hold the structure together long enough for the others to pull those people out. I am the strongest person on this ship. I am the only one who might be able to do it. You will die," Vasquez said, her voice cracking despite her efforts to stay composed. Mac smiled sadly and reached up to tap the medical display on his suit's wrist. The readings showed radiation levels that had already passed the lethal threshold. His cells were already dying. His organs were already beginning to fail. "I am already dead, Elena," he said quietly. "The math just has not caught up with me yet. Let me do something that matters." Vasquez stared at her oldest friend, the man who had served beside her for 15 years, who had saved her life more times than she could count. She wanted to argue, wanted to find some alternative, But she knew as well as he did that there was none. The rest of you, get ready to move the moment Mac creates an opening, she ordered, her voice steady even though her heart was breaking. Not a single second wasted. We pull those survivors out and we get back to the ship. The team moved into position around the damaged section while Mac approached the buckled hull. The metal groaned and shifted with every gravitational fluctuation, barely holding together. One wrong move would bring it all crashing down. "Mac," Vasquez said, through the communicator. "Thank you for everything. Just buy me a drink when you get home," he replied with a grin. "Tell the bartender to put it on my tab. I will not be paying it anyway." Before anyone could respond, Mac activated his suit's emergency power reserves and pushed through the gap in the hull. The metal screamed in protest as his massive frame forced it apart. The entire structure began to collapse around him. Tons of debris and twisted supports falling toward the trapped survivors below, and James McAllister caught it. His arm shot out. His legs braced, and through sheer physical strength and impossible willpower, he held the collapsing section in place. His suit's integrity warning screamed as the pressure built. His bones groaned under the strain. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning them red. "Go?" he roared. "Get them out now." The rescue team surged forward, squeezing past Mac's straining body to reach the 12 trapped Corvani. They worked with frantic speed, carrying and dragging the survivors through the narrow opening that Mac's body was creating. Each second felt like an eternity as the metal continued to buckle and bend. DRSA reached the last survivor, a Corvani child barely old enough to walk. The little one was unconscious, their bioluminescence completely dark. Asay scooped them up with infinite gentleness and turned to flee. "Everyone is clear," Chun shouted. "Mac, let go." But Mac could not let go. His muscles had locked in place from the strain, his body pushed beyond any limit that should have been possible. He looked down at the tiny Corvani child in Asay's arms, and despite the agony, he smiled. "Take care of that kid," he said. "Tell them about Earth sometime. Tell them we have teddy bears and ice cream and sunsets that will make them cry. Mac, please." Vasquez screamed. "It is okay, Elena," he said, and his voice was peaceful. "I got to be a hero. Not everyone gets to be a hero." The stellar fragment pulsed with a brilliant flash of light, and the gravitational wave that followed was stronger than anything they had experienced. The damaged section of the Volantis finally gave way, and James McAllister disappeared beneath 1,000 tons of twisted metal. "No," Vasquez cried, but Chen and Asay were already pulling her back toward the adamantine. There was no time for grief, no time for tears. The fragment was minutes away from complete detonation. The rescue team scrambled aboard their ship, carrying the last of the Corvani survivors. The moment everyone was inside, Lieutenant Tanaka fired the engines at maximum thrust, tearing the adamantine away from the doomed research vessel behind them. The Volantis vanished in an expanding sphere of fire and radiation as the stellar fragment finally exploded. The shockwave slammed into the adamantine's rear shields, throwing everyone to the deck. For one terrible moment, it seemed like the ship would be torn apart. Then they were through, bursting out of the Ashfall Nebula into the clear darkness of normal space silence, filled the bridge as the crew processed what had just happened. They had saved 43 Corvani lives. They had lost Mac and 2 other crew members who had been caught in the collapse. The cost was heavy, but it was a cost they had all understood from the beginning in the medical bay. Chief Researcher Saleth woke to find Dr. Asay carefully treating their radiation burns. The massive human moved with exhausted slowness, his own body clearly suffering from the exposure he had endured. "Your friend," Saleth said weakly. "The one who held the ceiling. He saved us." Asay paused in his work, and for a moment, Saleth saw infinite sadness in his gentle eyes. His name was James McAllister, Asay said quietly. He was the best of us. Why did he do it? Salith asked. Why did he die for people he had never met? Asay considered the question for a long moment before answering. Because that is what humans do, he said finally. We protect each other. We protect everyone. It is written in our blood, carved into our bones by the world that made us. We cannot look at someone in danger and walk away, even if it kills us, even if it costs everything. Salith did not understand, not really. Their species had always calculated risk and reward, had always made logical decisions based on probability and self-preservation. The idea of throwing away your life for strangers was alien to everything they had ever known. But as they looked at the grieving human doctor, at the tears that fell silently down his dark cheeks, Salith realized that perhaps logic was not the only way to measure the worth of an action. Perhaps love was worth more than mathematics would ever understand. The Adamantine limped into Corvani space 3 cycles later, its hull scarred and blackened, its engines running at barely half capacity. Its crew, exhausted beyond measure, word of their arrival had spread faster than light itself. By the time the damaged rescue frigate reached the orbital station above Corvan Prime, a fleet of ships had gathered to escort them in. Corvani vessels flew in formation around the battered Terran ship like an honor guard, their crews pressing against viewports to catch a glimpse of the Deathworlders, who had done the impossible. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on her bridge and watched the welcoming fleet with tired eyes. She had not slept since the escape from the nebula, haunted by dreams of Mac's final smile and the sound of collapsing metal. 3 of her crew were dead, and no amount of gratitude would ever bring them back. We are being hailed by approximately 47 different channels. Communications Officer Park reported with something approaching awe. Everyone wants to talk to us. News agencies, government officials, the Corvani High Council, even representatives from other species. Tell them we will make official statements after our wounded have been treated and our dead have been honored. Vasquez replied. Not before. The Adamantine docked at the main orbital station, and what happened next would become legendary across the galaxy. As the human crew carried their Corvani survivors down the boarding ramp, thousands of Corvani citizens had gathered to witness their arrival. The moment the first human stepped onto the station, the crowd began to glow. It started with one individual, their bioluminescence shifting from the gray of grief to the brilliant gold of profound gratitude. Then another joined them, and another, until the entire station was illuminated by the combined light of thousands of Corvani, expressing an emotion too deep for words. The ROC, carrying young Velith in his arms, stopped at the sight and felt tears streaming down his face. The child stirred and looked up at the glowing crowd with wide, wondering eyes. They are saying thank you, Velith whispered. They're saying thank you with all their hearts. 2 cycles later, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address what had happened in the Ashfall Nebula. Representatives from dozens of species filled the great amphitheater, their attention fixed on the small Corvani figure standing at the central podium. Chief Researcher Salith had recovered enough to give testimony, though their movements were still slow and their bioluminescence remained dim. They looked out at the assembled delegates and took a deep breath before speaking. I am here to tell you about the Deathworlders, Salith began. I am here to tell you that everything we thought we knew about them was wrong. A murmur rippled through the council chamber when our ship became trapped in the Ashfall Nebula. We sent distress calls to 17 species, Salith continued. Every single one of you refused to help. You calculated the risks and decided that 43 lives were not worth the danger. I am not here to condemn you for that decision because by your logic, by the mathematics of survival that governs civilized society, you were correct. They paused, letting the words sink in, but the humans did not calculate risk. They calculated lives. 43 lives that mattered to them simply because those lives existed. They flew into a region of space that should have killed them, endured radiation and gravitational forces that would have destroyed any other species. And they refused to stop until every single one of us was safe. Sayla's voice grew stronger as they spoke. I watched a human named James McAllister hold a collapsing ceiling with his bare hands so that 12 strangers could escape. He knew he would die. He knew there was no chance of survival. And he did it anyway because that was simply who he was. That was who all of them are. The Volturi ambassadors shifted uncomfortably in their seat, their multifaceted eyes avoiding Sayla's gaze. We call them Deathworlders because they come from a hostile planet, because their bodies are dense and strong, because they can survive things that would kill us instantly, Sayla said. But that name is incomplete. Yes, they were forged by death. Yes, their world tried to destroy them at every turn. But they did not become monsters. They became protectors. Captain Vasquez sat in the gallery reserved for guests, her face impassive as she listened to Sayla's testimony. Beside her, the surviving members of her crew watched with a mixture of pride and grief. The Mandari ambassador rose to speak, their ethereal form trembling with what might have been shame. We sent a message of condolence, they admitted. We offered prayers and farewells instead of help. I do not understand how the humans could do what we could not. How can any species willingly embrace death for the sake of strangers? Vasquez stood before anyone could stop her, and the council chamber fell silent. The Deathworlder walked to the central podium, her scarred face and tired eyes telling a story that words could never capture. You ask how we can embrace death, she said, her voice carrying through the vast space. The answer is simple. We do not embrace death. We embrace life. Every human knows that their time is finite, that tomorrow is never guaranteed. Our world taught us that lesson before we ever left our caves. She looked around at the assembled representatives. These fragile beings who had evolved on gentle worlds and had never known true struggle. The knowledge does not make us reckless. It makes us treasure every moment and every person. When we look at someone in danger, we do not see a calculation of risk versus reward. We see a life that matters, a story that deserves to continue, a light that should not be extinguished. The council chamber was utterly silent. You calculated odds, Vasquez continued. We calculated lives. Your mathematics told you that rescue was impossible. Our mathematics was simpler. 43 people needed help. We could give it. The equation balanced itself. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but filled with conviction. That is what separates us. Not our dense bones or our resistance to radiation. What separates us is that we refuse to accept acceptable losses. Every life is precious to us. Every person is worth saving. Even if it costs us everything. Even if we have to walk through fire to do it. The emergency session continued for several more hours. But the outcome was already decided. Humanity's place in the galaxy had shifted forever. They were still Deathworlders, still terrifying, still incomprehensible to species who had never known hardship, but now they were something else as well. They were the ones who answered when no one else would. They were the protectors, the rescuers, the impossible hope in the darkness. A week later, the Adamantan departed Kolvani space with a new crew member to replace those they had lost. Young Velith had begged to join them, to learn the ways of the Deathworlders who had saved their life. Their parents had agreed after much debate, understanding that their child had been touched by something profound as the ship accelerated toward open space. A new distress call crackled across the communications array. A mining colony on the edge of an asteroid field was requesting help. Their station was failing, their atmosphere was venting, and no one else was responding. Captain Vasquez looked at her crew, at these impossible humans who had followed her through hell and would follow her through it again, and felt a surge of fierce pride. "Set a course," she ordered. "Captain," Lieutenant Tanaka said with a slight smile. "Someone has to do it." The Adamantan turned toward the distant colony, its scarred hull gleaming in the starlight, and raced once more into the unknown, because that was what Deathworlders did, that was what humans did, and they would never stop.